Hi, I'm Ken Brophy, and today I'm going to show you how to visualize data using Admin Console. So before we can visualize the data, we need some data to visualize. So I'm going to pull up Shapes here, Shapes Demo, publish a couple of triangles, a few of them actually. Let's do green, and how about an orange, and also a square. Okay, now we've got some data, and let's kick off Admin Console. Okay, so here we can see the two data topics that I created a minute ago, and we can create a subscription and see data in two different ways. First one is we can pull up the triangle topic, go to topic data, and push the subscribe button. You can do the same thing by right-clicking and doing subscribe. And there's another menu item there for visualize. We're going to see that later. So you get a dialog here to create your subscription, and there's a number of fields on this dialog. So the first one here is the data type. We happen to only have one data type. Topics can have multiple different data types in DDS, so there may be different types that you could use to create your subscription. If there are different data types, you can use this button to see the details of the one that you chose to make sure that it's the one that you wanted. You can also look at the IDL if you prefer IDL rather than the tree. Also, if you do not have any data types, if you don't send them on discovery, you might need to load your data types from an XML file. You can do so with this dialog. You can pick your file. If you have include directories, you can add those here. Pick your string and sequence max bounds, and then go ahead and OK it. Once you do so, it'll populate this combo box here with your data types, and again, you can use the button to see the details of it. Also, you can pick your QoS. Inside of your QoS here, we pick the Admin Console Data Visualization, which has the minimum amount of requirements on your system, meaning best effort and volatile durability. But you can pick any one that you want. Also, if there's one of the built-ins that you want to use, you can check that box and get a lot more choices. And lastly, if you want, you can add your own QoS file in your own profiles through this dialog. When you do so, those will become available in this combo box and you can pick them. Also, if you're not sure what the settings are, you can hit the button to get a view of the QoS for the reader, participant, the topic, the subscriber. Here you can override the values that come from the profile. So you can override reliability, durability, ownership, the time-based filter, and the partitions. In particular, this time I think I want to override reliability and make it reliable. Typically, I do not need to, you won't need to override the time-based filter because the data visualization feature in Admin Console has very high performance. So I would recommend starting with no filter and only change the filter if you need to, and that's something you can change later on. By default, the partitions that we use are the empty partition and the star partition. That will match any combination of partitions out there. If, however, you want to filter it down just to a certain partition, you can always hit the button here to edit that, remove the ones that come by default, and add your own so that you can match the ones you want. For the content filter expression, we could use an expression like x greater than 50. If we want to filter out values of x that are less than 50, less than or equal to 50. But in this case, I don't have any need for that, but know that it's there if you do need it. Lastly, we could filter by data writer. So in this case, we've got 4 data writers. I don't have any need at this moment to filter by data writers, but if you were, for example, trying to see the data coming from a particular host or a particular process on that host, then you might want to filter and just see data from that particular data writer or that set of data writers. So you're welcome to do that too. That'll help you debug. Okay, So we okay the dialog, and we get another dialog here asking if we want to go to the data visualization perspective. Currently we're in the administration perspective, so I think that would be better because that helps us focus on visualization. Okay, now we've subscribed and we're getting data. So the first view that comes up here is what we call the instance table. This is a table where each row represents an instance in your topic, and the columns represent the data fields for your data and for the sample info or the metadata. This particular view has a number of features. You can filter data instances to just see rows that you're interested in. And you can select fields if there are more fields that you want to see, or maybe less fields. Maybe we don't care about the Y value. And maybe we also want to see the source timestamp, so we can add that in there. We'll get all those in here. And as you can see, the data is updating in real time. So you get the most current value. And in our case, this is a streaming topic, so it's streaming data over here rather rapidly. We can tell by looking at the bottom here, the throughput is 64 samples per second. We haven't lost any data, and we have 4 instances. So that's about 16 samples per second for each instance in this case, which happens to be what Shapes publishes on Windows. You can pause the data that's coming in if you want to get a better look at it. And what this does is it actually just pauses updates to the screen. It doesn't delete the data reader from the admin console. It just stops updating the screen. You can also go back and look at the properties. Again, you can see the data type that you're using, the QoS that you actually use to create the data reader, the participant, the topic, the subscriber. You can look at all of those. You can change the time-based filter. So for example, let's say that I only want to get data every 1,000 milliseconds or once every second. We can change that and see the effect here immediately. Now in this case, this actually does change the data reader's QoS. So now we're getting 4 samples per second rather than 64. So that's actually changing how it interacts on the DDS distribution. So let's put that back down to 0. We can change the partitions. Again, maybe we didn't know which partition we wanted earlier on. Now we do. We can go and change that. You can see the instances. We don't have a content filter. See how many data writers there are. The throughput, and again, change the writer filter if you so choose. This next button here just auto adjusts all the columns that we're looking at based on the current data. And we don't have any not alive instances, but let's take a look at that. If we go back to Shapes, and let's say that we dispose a couple of these. So how about the blue? Let's dispose the blue, and the purple, let's unregister that. Doing so changes our instance state from alive to not alive disposed or not alive no writers. So this was the dispose, this was the unregister. And if we want to get rid of those rows in the table because we're not interested in them anymore, we can click on this clear not alive instances, and any instance which isn't alive will go away. Lastly, here we have the export button. So if we click on the export button and export data to an instance table file, we can go back to the file system and take a look at that. And here you can see all the data that was in our table. It's basically a dump of our table out to the file. All right, our next view is the sample inspector. Currently, the sample inspector isn't showing any data. Well, why is that? That's because I haven't clicked on either of these two samples, these two instances. So once I choose one of them, it will start filling in with data. Now, it fills in data for all the fields of the data type. So you can see all the data values rather than only seeing a few of them here. You can see all of them, and they're in a vertical fashion. So if you have dozens and dozens of fields, this might be a better way to look at your data. It's a little more friendly to the GUI format. You can also look at all your sample info. You can see all of the metadata fields here, and as you can tell, they're updating in real time. Well, this is also kind of difficult to look at, so you can also pause this display and take your time and go through and look at all the bits of data here. Now, we clicked on this instance and the data changed. If we click on another instance, we'll get the different one now. Now we have green rather than orange. One thing you can do is if you want to see both, you can get yourself a new sample inspector. And let's maybe drag it over here. And this one is looking at green. I want to lock him down, so I can turn this link with selection off, then choose orange. And now I can compare these two values. Of course, if I pause them, it'll be a lot easier. Now I can compare the two to one another. Just a little trick in case you're debugging and you want to compare a couple of pieces of data to each other to see what the differences are. All right, let's get rid of that one. Turn our linking back on and unpause. We can also export data from the sample inspector. Now this one goes to a text file. So let's take a look at this text file. And basically what we get is a dump of all the fields and then a dump of all the sample info, all the metadata. So this can be very helpful if you want to share data with a colleague. You know, why is this green getting to 120? It should have never gone above 108. Who knows, right? So this is the export. The next button here simply expands all the fields or collapses them all. So it's a quick access if you have a lot of nested fields, a lot of nested data structures. You can simply hit the button. If you want to, clear out the selection for whatever reason, you can do so, and then pick the instance again, and then you've got your typical minimize, maximize buttons. Okay, now this is, all helpful and it's useful, but the data is flying by rather quickly. What if I want to see the data values over time, and I don't want to pause the displays all the time to try to see what's going on? Well, we do have a view for that, and I'll come back here and use the visualize menu. Let's go to the sample log and visualize this data with the sample log. So the sample log has the same filtering ability as the instance table and the sample inspector. And it also has columns here that present the data. And the index is simply the next index for each piece of data it receives. It just increments through that, along with it tells you what topic it's coming from, what instance, the source time, and the value of the selected fields. Now, you can show whatever you want with these columns. If you go into the configure button, and let's configure the triangle. So let's say we want to show angle, and let's see, and maybe the sample state. So if we do that, we'll get much more information here. Sample state is not particularly interesting. It's just saying that this sample wasn't read before we read it. Well, okay. But if you have other fields that you want to see, you can definitely put them in there. Also, you can select the visible columns. So let's turn off the sample state and go back to the visible columns and maybe pick the publication handle and maybe the domain. And now we'll auto size the columns to fit the data. Okay, this is a little more interesting here. Now we can see the publication handle of the data writer that's actually writing the data. We can see our data that we've chosen to view here, and we know which domain and topic it's coming from. Now again, this is moving rather quickly, so let's simply pause the updates here and take a look at one particular sample. Now when I clicked on it, you saw the sample inspector change. And this is where the sample log becomes very powerful. So I'm looking at green with 120 and 55, but if I use my arrow keys to walk down through the data, you can see the sample inspector changing with every data sample. So now I can take my time and look through every data sample and understand every update. For example, if I just want to see the green, then I can click on this and walk through and see every change that was made. So it looks like our Y value was changing quite a bit, but our X value is staying exactly the same, and our angle is changing a little bit each time. So that becomes very useful when you're using the sample log. The other really useful feature of this sample log is to view multiple topics at once. So for example, if I want to view the square and the topic and the triangle together, I can drag the square down here and drop it in. Now since I haven't subscribed to the square yet, it asks me, well, here's a subscription that you want to create. How do you want to set it up? So I'm going to use reliable again and leave all the rest at the default. So now, once I clear this out, we will see the triangle and the square data intermingled together in this view. And this is really powerful. Now, you may be trying to debug a request reply type of topic. You can see the requests and the replies all together in the same view here. Select the request, look at the key fields, look at all the data fields. Select the reply, look at those data fields. Or perhaps you have a data processor and you want to see the data that goes into it and the data that comes out of it. So you could add the inputs and the outputs to this table, to the sample log, and you can walk through the different inputs and then look at the different outputs. And that's a very powerful debugging technique. Let's just pause this for a second. The other interesting thing is that with this publication handle, it's hyperlinked. So I can click on this particular sample, this red square, and see the exact data writer that wrote it. I can do the same with the green triangle and the same with the orange triangle, and notice that they're all different data writers. Now, of course, the square and the triangle have to be on different data writers because they're in different topics. But the green and the orange instances could have been written from a single data writer, or they could have been written from two data writers. In this case now, I've just found out, yeah, those are two different data writers. So the other interesting thing here, the other tools on the toolbar, you can clear out the sample log if you like. You can also export the sample log. So let's export it and then take a look at what we get. So this goes into a CSV file as our instance table had before, and you can see the values of all the fields that we selected, and it basically dumps out the table to a file so that you can do whatever you like with it. Okay, so that's the sample log. And the sample log is interesting, but what if I have data that is changing rapidly but is also numerical, and I want to see the historical data values? It becomes very helpful to be able to plot that type of data. Now, in this case, the data that we get from shapes is not very interesting for looking at with a chart. So instead of that, let's use a different data type and a different topic. Let's use this little simulator of electrocardiogram data. So here we have John Doe, and here in the sample inspector we can see his ECG, but again, it's not very interesting, and the sample log will also not help us here because we don't really want to look at the data values one at a time. So instead, let's visualize this in a time chart. All right, so now we have the time chart, but here again, the default values for the time chart are not terribly helpful when it comes to this particular topic. So let's change that let's take a look at maybe a 5-second window of data rather than 2 minutes. And that's a lot better. So now we can see the actual data. We can see what it looks like, and there's a lot of information to be gained just by looking at the chart itself, much more so than looking at text or tables, and it just has a lot more appeal. Becomes very obvious what you're looking at, and that's exactly what the time chart was intended to do. So here we can see that the values are scrolling in real time. The newest values on the right, older values on the left. If in fact we want to look at older values, we can switch it to historical mode. And then we can go back and look at data values anywhere along the timeline since we created the time chart. Now, there's a whole bunch of different things you can do with the toolbar. For example, we can give the chart a title, John Doe ECG, and we can see that fill in right here. We might want to put an annotation in here, start, and maybe drag it to the top of this peak, and maybe a second one, and we drag that to the same peak in the next period. And from this, we could look at the times, 4.2 seconds and 5.08, and we could get the heart rate, for example. Not a very convenient way to do it, but if you're trying to do deep analysis, very useful. You can also save the data in this chart to a file. So let's do that. We do a snapshot. If we look at that, we've got our John Doe ECG along with our annotations and the data in question. Now I'm going to just remove these annotations because they don't really help us anymore. Other things we can do, rubber band zoom. You can zoom in to a particular area. You can zoom in to a particular time set. And then you've got your regular zoom in, zoom out buttons. Any of these zoom buttons that you use, if you hold over an axis, you can use your mouse wheel and shorten or lengthen the zoom for that axis. And of course you can do the same for this axis. If you do get zoomed in, you want to pan around, you can do that. That's your pan button. And over here we've got a button that controls the side panel, whether you want to show it or not. Personally, I prefer it off. And we've also got an export button. So by default, when I am in historical mode, it will export the data that is being shown in the time chart. So let's just go ahead and do that. And once again, that's in CSV form. There is our data format, unfortunately, is not recognized by Excel, but it's pretty easy to understand. The day, the time, and then down to the fractions of a second. And then you have all your data. Lastly, if you want to change anything about the display of the trace, there's a number of different things that you can do. You can change which timestamp value is used to source or the reception. If you have multiple y-axes, which you can add right here, you can change which y-axis is being used to show it. Change your trace color if you like blue. Maybe we want a dashed line with 2 and triangles of size 5. Right, so there we go. And we get that updated display. This is how much memory is used to store the samples for drawing, and these are the number of samples that we want to store to disk. So by default we store 1,000,000 samples to disk, which uses 16 megabytes. You can always change that if you want to store more data or less, depending on how much disk space you have. and that's the time chart. Of course, minimize and maximize. All right, I hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you the next time.